Hi friends, welcome to a new lecture for our class Introduction to Comparative Politics. In the earlier video, I discussed the historical origins of global inequality and global gap between the West and non-Western parts of the world. And I discussed how the leading scholar Andre Gunder Frank approached to this important problem. In this video, I will be again discussing on the same issue on the origins of global gap, this time over the perspective of Hajun Cheng, again a very prominent economist, or just a scholar of political economy. So, in a historical period, starting with 1980s, actually a new economic paradigm, what is known neoliberal economics, dominated the policy and academic sphere in economics and economic policies. So, it has been first developed by, let's say, what is known Chicago School, like Milton Friedman, and it has been later on represented by powerful incumbent politicians such as Ronald Reagan in the United States and Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain. So, according to this neoliberal paradigm, actually the problem of developing nations, or the reason that they are not as industrialized or as prosperous as the developed nations, is the, let's say, absence of dominant market, free market principles, institutions, and policies in these countries. So they argue that if we open these economies to foreign competition, if we allow the free market principles to prevail, then they will be rich. So, in line with this premises, they preached a set of fixated policies, such as the reduction of tariffs and other trade barriers, and privatization of key public sectors such as education and healthcare, and reduction of like worker rights or all other social welfare institutions. So they were preaching these policies because they were arguing that the industrialized, the developed nations of the time or today actually achieved this modernization and economic advancement by exactly following the same set of principles and institutions. So this was their claim. However, actually Harshun Chang is interrogating the veracity of this claim. He is of this claim. He is looking at the history of these industrialized countries, such most importantly United States and Great Britain, to question whether these premises or arguments or claims are true. And he says, unfortunately, no. So, like the today's developed nations or countries, again, such as United States and Great Britain, most importantly, actually they adopted the most stringent, protective policies when they are still in the phase of infant economies or infant industries. So, for example, Great Britain between 1721 and 1860, they adopted the most stringent, the most robust protective industry and trade policies. They subsidized their industries. They erected higher tariffs and trade barriers in order to protect their sectors or firms from external competition. And these obstacles or these protectionism was even much more powerful than what was applied in Germany and France at that time. This comparison is important because France is assumed to have a statist political culture. So rather than relying on individuals and market players, they were assumed to have relied much more on state powers and structures like unified or unitary, and so it's generally put in contrast with Great Britain in that respect. However, Hajun Chang shows that no, Great Britain was much more statist, much more protectionist than France at that time. Similarly, actually Germany, like the economic theoretician named Frederick List, is argued to develop the notion of economic protectionism, which is associated with German political economy. However, again, Chang shows that no, Great Britain was much more protectionist than Germany in that period. So only Great Britain was sure and certain that their industries got mature and became strong and competitive. They started to propagate like free market or free foreign trade principles because like their firms and companies and industries were already competitive enough to outbid their opponents or their rivals in this foreign trade. Harjun Chang is arguing that United States also has a very similar story. Between this end of Civil War, like mid 1860s, until the World War II, actually United States had the highest trade barriers and tariffs in the world. So they protected their economy. Actually, like the notion of dirigist or statist or protectionist, however you want to call it, economic policies, the philosophy justifying these policies actually was very popular and prominent in the United States at that time. So Alexander Hamilton, as you know, he's the first, he was an important uh, founding father and finance minister, developed this notion, and also Daniel Raymond, another important philosopher of the time, 19th century, also like contributed to development of this notion of statist or protection policies. And next, Sejun Chang is making an important claim here. If United States follow the economic doctrine of Adam Smith, as we discussed, it relies on the idea that nations should do whatever they are doing best. So United States was like doing very good, like in the agriculture sector, thanks to the slave labor. And if they adhere to this economic principle or idea, they will still be an agricultural country, according to his claim. So this is how the contradiction between what is portrayed or what is promoted as the premise of free market principles and policies today by these Western powers and what they have used to industrialize in their history. Similarly, actually, Hajun Chang is also looking at like different sets of institutions. So, like again, in this neoliberal paradigm or in our dominant understanding, we associate economic development with some institutions such as democracy or bureaucracy or intellectual property rights or certain international corporate finance institutions or finance or welfare institutions. Like these are set of institutions. We were saying that or arguing that without these institutions, without their creation or without them being in the place, then you cannot achieve industrialization or economic development in these countries. However, again, Hajun Chang is looking at history of these countries and saying that actually when they were like still developing, just like today's developing countries, these first world or these Western powers actually lack these economic and political institutions, which is today like argued as the necessary sets of institutions. So again, there is a apparent or obvious contradiction or inconsistency between what is portrayed or what is argued today and what the historical experience was. So then, what's happening here? According to Hajun Chang, actually, like these first world countries or Great Britain or United States or these developed nations, actually they have used a certain ladder to climb to where they are today, climb to the like top of economic and political hierarchy. However, now they are just kicking away the ladder in order to prevent others to climb the same ladder. He was saying that like the economic policies that you are arguing or you are promoting today actually doesn't work, and it doesn't work First, because you didn't industrialize by following them, and second, actually they don't work even today. So he just shares some like statistics. So the average annual per capita income growth in developing countries was 3% between 1960 and 1980. However, when these nations like they started to use or adopt, or they are most of the time forcefully, like these policies are forcefully imposed on them by again United States and Great Britain and the international economic institutions they control, such as World Bank, IMF, and the WTO, World Trade Organization. When they adopted this neoliberal paradigm, actually their growth rate diminished to 1.5%. It was 3% between 1960 and 1980, but it became 1.5% between 1980 and 2000. Additionally, like when we look at the same statistics for just Latin America, their growth rate of per capita income, like its annual average, was 3.1% between 1960 and 1980. However, like, it declined to 1.1% on annual average between 1980 and 2009. The same statistics for Africa is much more actually like sharp. It was around 1.5% between 1960 and 1980, but however, it has been 0.2% between 1980 and 2009. And what is more, actually after 2008 financial crisis, as you know, it started in the United States, and it later on diffused to like European Union, and later on then to other developing countries. To tackle with this economic or financial crisis, actually these economies, like again, most importantly United States, actually they adopted the policies such as like lower interest rates, like bailout of firms, or boost to demands, or increase public spending. However, they were preaching exactly opposite policies to other nations before this incident happened. So, like when the waves of financial crisis, let's say, hit Latin America or some parts of Asia or other parts of the world, they were just preaching these countries to increase interest rates and to reduce public spending. However, they adopted exactly reverse policies in their own home after 2000 financial crisis. So again, there is an apparent contradiction here. Then what should we do? So Hajun Chang is arguing that actually first, we need to publicize the history of today's industrialized nations to enable the developing countries today to develop or to formulate more informed, better informed policies. And also, like today, like there are some conditionalities uh, for the transfer of foreign aid or some multilateral agreements. However, he was saying that no, these conditionalities actually take the like false actually like Western experience as the paradigm, as the recipe here, and imposing it to other parts of the world. However, this recipe is historically wrong, and also like these recipe, just these fixated set of institutions and principles, actually don't work everywhere. So the approach or perspective of one fits all doesn't work. So like we need to look at like domestic economic and political institutions and structure and the context to develop like much more convenient trade and industrial policies without or rather than following a like already predetermined like ahistorical or decontextual let's say paradigm developed by the Western countries and institutions. And he was saying that actually like allow these countries to develop much more protective even trade and industry policies, allow them to subsidize their infant industries, allow them to higher their tariffs or in other trade barriers, because they need to first like increase the robustness and depth and strength of their markets and firms and companies and economies. Otherwise, they will be very fragile, very vulnerable to in the competition with foreign trades, and they will be very vulnerable against again foreign competition, and they will be very fragile against sudden, instant financial attacks and transactions. Okay, so this is the summary of what Harjun Chang is arguing in his very important article, like Kicking Away the Lead Ledger. I hope you find it helpful, and thanks so much for taking your time to listen to this lecture. Hope to see you in another one for next week. Take care.